What's going on, guys? It's Hi with the Upper Left USA, and if you've been with this channel for a little while, you know that I'm in a little bit of a predicament in terms of what camera system I want to invest in. Over the last few months, I've been really heavily into selling off as much camera gear as I possibly can. A lot of this just has to do with me being a hoarder and keeping everything, but some of it is because I'm trying to narrow my gear down so that I can just focus on one camera system so I don't waste a lot of money on everything else. So you may or may not know, but I started out with Nikon APS-C, and I still have that gear sitting right there because that's my very first camera and my first lenses, so that will most likely never be sold. But then I moved to Nikon full frame, and I just had a bunch of the lenses and bodies, and it was just time to get rid of them. After Nikon, I moved to Sony with the Sony a7R II, and then now ultimately using the Sony a7R III for my main work. So even though I've been relatively happy with Sony over the past few years using a variety of their camera bodies, a part of me has always been on the fence because I knew that one day the big two manufacturers, Canon and Nikon, were going to get into the full frame mirrorless game, and they have the potential of really upsetting everything. Because of this, I never really fully invested into Sony E-mount. Sure, I may have bought a few bodies and a few lenses, but at the end of the day, I was ready to sell them off if I needed to change manufacturers. Well, 2018 has come, and pretty much every manufacturer seems to be interested in full-frame mirrorless nowadays. But like I've said in a previous video, even though all these other camera manufacturers are coming into this full-frame mirrorless game, it just seems like Sony is producing the best package for me. So ultimately what I'm trying to say is that I think that I'm really going to start investing into the Sony E-mount system now. And to prove my commitment, I've just bought this lens, the Sony 70-200 f2.8 G Master. For my personal work, I really don't need a lot of different lenses. Realistically, I can get away with only using two different lenses. A 24-70 f2.8 is a must for my kit because that's my favorite lens focal length aperture combo. Then the second lens would have to be a 70-200 2.8, which I just bought. The majority of my work involves travel, landscapes, portraitures, and events. And for me personally, I feel like these are the only two lenses that I really need to cover these four main things. As far as a 24-70 f2.8, I've had that since pretty much day one. I pre-ordered it right when Sony announced it, but with the 70-200, that's a different story. I've held off on this lens for a little while now. I think the first reason for this is because it's a relatively big investment, both financially and mentally. This lens costs $2,600, and that's a big investment. But for me personally, I'm willing to blow the money if it's going to advance my career. So it wasn't so much about the financial aspect of it, but more the mental aspect of investing in this lens. Because I knew that if I bought the 70-200 2.8, I was going to be investing in Sony E-mount, and I just didn't know if I was ready to make that commitment. But I think now that we've seen what other camera manufacturers has in store for the near future as far as their camera and lens lineup, I still would say that Sony is producing what's best for me, so it just makes sense to really just dive in and actually get into Sony E-mount by now at least. Before buying this lens, I actually narrowed it down to three choices: the 70-200 f4, 70-200 2.8, and of course the 100-400 4.5 to 5.6. The 70-200 f4 was a huge contender because it had a lot of things going for it. First off, it's $1,100 cheaper than the 2.8. But like I said, I wasn't really worried about the money difference. It's more about what can get the job done. Another big thing that the 70-200 f4 has going for it is the overall size and weight. If you've never seen these two or three lenses side by side, the 70-200 f4 is absolutely tiny in comparison to the other two lenses. If you're hiking for miles and miles, this is great for very obvious reasons. The 100-400 is a little bit different for me because I've never actually owned a similar lens. I've never owned a super telephoto. I've never owned something above 200 millimeters. I was really interested in the 100-400 for its possibilities in landscape photography. The ability to reach in to 400 and just capture little details, say on the face of a mountain or a tree miles and miles away. That I think is really interesting. But ultimately, what I'm trying to do with my camera gear is to be a minimalist, travel with as little and as light as I possibly can. Although the 70-200 f4 offers a better package in size, and the 100-400 offers more versatility in something about the same size, at the end of the day, for me, it just came down to that f2.8 aperture. Had I gone with the 70-200 f4 or the 100-400 4.5 to 5.6, I really think that I would have had to buy another lens just to get something a little bit faster. I just recently came back from shooting a destination wedding in Mexico, and this was the catalyst for me. This was my reasoning for wanting a f2.8. For this trip, I had access to 2 bodies and 2 lenses, the A7R2, A7R3, the 16-35 f4, and the 24-70 f2.8. For pretty much the entire day, the entire event, I shot with my A7R3 and the 24-70 f2.8, but later in the night, I decided to switch to the A7R2 with the 16-35 f4 on it to see how that would go. But when I made the switch, I did so after we moved inside. After the sun already set, we were indoors, and the dance was starting. So I don't know if you've ever been to a wedding or any dances, but people don't typically dance with the lights on. They're typically dimmed with some minor strobes or whatever flashing everywhere. In terms of photography, this just means that you're going to have to jack your ISO way up. When I was shooting with the A7R2 and the 16-35mm f4, my ISO got up to 12,800. And if I were shooting with my 24-70 f2.8, that's one stop faster. Instead of 12,800, I would have been at 6,400. And that is a major, major difference. 6,400 isn't exactly ideal, but when you're shooting with ambient light, it's a hell of a lot better than 12,800. So for me, as someone who still shoots indoor, dimly lit events, having the one-stop extra light is just a no-brainer. At the end of the day, I think I've made the right decision in investing in this lens and Sony E-mount. But overall, I think I'm more excited about just being able to have another focal length to work with besides the 24-70. Like I said, the 24-70 is my go-to, but it's always nice to have other focal lengths to play with, especially when you're in the mountains or shooting portraitures and events. It just makes life a lot easier. That being said, I will be taking the 70-200 along with me on a few upcoming trips, so make sure you guys subscribe to see that. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, share it around, comment down below any thoughts or questions that you may have. Thank you for subscribing to this channel and watching my content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.